Hey, thanks for watching. Today, we're going to dive into our camera settings. If you haven't already, make sure you watch my video, Photography 101 for Beginners, where I give a super beginner level explanation of your two main camera settings, aperture and shutter speed. That is designed for someone who just got their camera out of their box and wants to start to conceptualize what these settings mean. Now, the reason I started making these videos is because I don't want what happened to me to happen to anybody else. Years ago, I got my camera, and for years, I used it on auto mode. All my pictures were terrible, so I started to read about camera settings, and I read hundreds of articles. It took forever because I was missing the most important part, a visual guide. It's hard to understand your camera settings when you're reading. You need to see what the settings mean and start to understand it in a visual way. So I made these three videos. There's this video, which is on aperture, the next video on shutter speed, and the following video on ISO, where in that video we're going to tie everything together so that you can finally understand and learn how to use your camera on manual mode and take the pictures that you really desire. Using your camera on auto mode is okay. But if you want to take your pictures to the next level and really take those pictures you want, you need to learn and understand your camera and be able to use it in manual mode. After you watch these three videos, I promise you'll have a good understanding of your camera so that you can start practicing and taking it to the next step and mastering manual mode. Today we're going to talk about aperture. That sounds like a big fancy word, but all it means is the opening of your camera. Think of it as the pupil of your eye. When you are in a bright room or outside, your pupil is going to constrict, make a smaller opening so less light gets in. When you are indoors or in a dark room, your pupil is going to dilate or open up to let in more light. Your camera works exactly like that, and you have control over that setting. That setting is your aperture setting, and it is measured by something called an f-stop. When you adjust your aperture, or that f-stop, you are determining how large that opening is. You're determining how much light is getting in your camera. Look on the back of your camera right now. I'm showing a picture right here of what the f-stop number is. It's literally an F with a number next to it. Now, depending on your camera, that might be in a different place. But if you look, I guarantee you'll see the f-stop somewhere on the back of your camera. Now that we understand what the f-stop is and what aperture does to the camera in very general terms, we're going to talk about how you can change it. So it's actually reversed. If you make that f-stop a smaller number, say a 2 or a 3, it's a bigger opening. If you make that number larger, so say around a 16, it's a smaller opening. Another amazing capability of the f-stop is the ability to give that background blur that everybody loves. That's what makes pictures look professional. A smaller f-stop, so a larger opening, will give more background blur. The range of your f-stop or your aperture, that f number, is determined by the lens that you have and your camera. So my lens, for example, can go down to 1.8. I love that. That's a lot of background blur, and it gives me the opportunity to take a lot of pictures indoor or in a dark room. Here are some examples where I use aperture to get the shot that I wanted. Now we're going to practice. The only way to really understand your camera is to practice. And we're going to do it in a 3-step approach. So during this module, we're going to practice aperture. During the next one, we're going to practice and master shutter speed. And then at the end, we'll practice the other settings and tie it all together. So if you get your camera out, you have two options. You could put it on manual mode, which is the M. You will be able to do that at the end of the modules, but for practicing aperture, I want you to put it on A. If it's a Nikon, it says A. If it's a Canon you're using, it might say AV. What it means is that your camera mode is aperture priority. What that means is that you are determining the opening of the camera. You're determining that f-stop number. Your camera will read all the lighting and everything that's around and adjust the other settings to match up with the aperture that you decide. To practice this, get 3 toys or subjects. You can pause the video if you like to go find something. I have 3 toys: Daddy Pig, Sven, and Iron Man. What you're going to do is set up your subjects or your toys at varying distances from you. I'm going to put Sven first. I'm going to put Daddy Pig in the middle behind Sven. And then lastly, I'm going to put Iron Man in the back. Now set your camera to a low aperture. Depending on your lens and camera, it might be a little bit different. Now you're going to focus on the middle subject and take a picture. You can see that in this example where I had a very low numbered aperture or a wide lens, I'm focusing on the Daddy Pig and the other 2 subjects are very blurry. Now I'm going to bump up my aperture to around an 8. When I focus on Daddy Pig and take the picture here, you can see that the other 2 subjects are still slightly blurry, but they are more in focus than the previous picture. Lastly, I'm going to bump up my aperture even more, and you can see here that all 3 subjects are pretty much in focus. That is the capability that you have with your aperture setting. You can adjust how much light is coming in, and you can adjust that background blur. So now it's time for you to practice. Go out, practice the settings. Put your camera in aperture priority mode and move that aperture up and down and take a lot of different pictures of different things to get a feel for what happens when you change that setting. When you grasp aperture, then it's time to move on to the next setting or my next video, which is the shutter speed module. If you go down to the comments, head on over to my blog at simplysnappingmom.com. You can print out when you subscribe to a ton of different free resources and guides. I recommend printing out this resource here. This resource will remind you while you're starting to learn aperture, what aperture is. So it's the pupil or the opening of your eye. It shows you where on your camera that number is and what happens when you increase that number and decrease that number. So to summarize again, aperture is your camera setting that determines the size of the opening of your lens or your camera's pupil. You can make it larger to let in more light with a smaller number, or you can constrict it or make it smaller with a bigger number. And again, you can use this setting to determine how much background blur you have in your picture, which everybody likes. Now you're ready to watch the next video in my series on shutter speed. Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/simplysnappingblog. And make sure you head on over to our website at simplysnappingmom.com, where we have a ton of free guides and resources on both photography and simplifying parenthood.